Well, hi everyone, good afternoon and welcome to the Junior Lawyer Division Cardiff and South East Wales webinar. My name is Georgia, I'm from the Conveyancing Foundation and I'm also a Wellbeing Officer for JLD. That's a shortened version because it's quite a mouthful to say that several times throughout the webinar. So I just thought I'd quickly introduce then our wonderful panel who will be chatting to us today about junior lawyer mental health. We have Elizabeth Rimmer, who is the CEO of LawCare, which is a mental health charity for the legal sector, and they do some incredible work in supporting the mental health within our community. We have Clare Good, who is the associate at Capital Law. Clare is also a LawCare champion and former JLD chairwoman. We also have Hannah Newberry, who's a recently qualified solicitor at Alun Family Law, and Grace Day, who's a solicitor at Geldards. Both Hannah and Grace are wellbeing officers as well at JLD. Just to give a little introduction of what we're going to be talking about today. So the focus will be mental health in junior lawyers. We know that the sector can be very stressful anyway, and that perhaps the culture in law has not always been conducive to promoting good mental health and well-being. But there are particular challenges that do face junior lawyers. So the aim of today's session is to kind of highlight those and discuss some personal experiences from the panel, but also to provide some tips and advice, so things that can help you if you're a student about to enter into that kind of part of your career, if you are a junior lawyer, or even if you're somebody more senior in an organisation, about how you can help support those junior lawyers within your organisation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Elizabeth, who's going to provide us with a kind of an overview of the mental health situation in junior lawyers. So over to you, Elizabeth.
Thanks very much, Georgia, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'll tell you just a tiny little bit about LawCare and then about some research that we've done into mental health and well-being across the legal sector. So as you already know, we're a charity that support and promote mental health throughout the legal sector. And we've actually been going for 25 years. The 6th of February, 1997 is the year we were set up. So it's our 25th anniversary this year. So we've got lots of things planned to acknowledge that as we go through the year. Most of that will be in the second half of the year. But we're here to provide support to anybody in the sector who's concerned about a personal or professional problem or something that's worrying them. And the unique thing about LawCare is that when you contact us, everyone who responds to our support services are people who've worked in the law. So we get it. I'm a former solicitor myself. Our staff and volunteers on our helpline and our web chat are all lawyers or people who've worked in other roles within the legal sector. So we really understand what this environment's like, and we provide that space for people to talk about things that are worrying them. We can then help you work out what steps you may need to take to resolve what's going on for you and point you in that direction. Most people just call us once or contact us once, and they find that just getting something off their chest and talking about it makes a big difference, because it's very challenging in the law for people in our sector sort of put their hands up and say that they're struggling with something. There's that fear of this will be a career limiting step, but you'll be seen as weak or not good enough. So there's lots of stigma, even in a world now where we're talking much more about mental health and well-being. Stigma is still a big challenge, and it silences people from coming forward for the help that's available. But a growing part of our work, in addition to the support, is really about prevention and education and raising awareness. We want to prevent some of the problems we see in the law from happening in the first place. And so in order to understand that better, we undertook a large study last year, which you may have seen, called Life in the Law, which we published at the end of September. We had over 1,700 legal professionals from across the UK reply to that, because we work in all the jurisdictions and with all branches of the profession. And we don't only support people who are legally qualified, we also support people who work in other roles within firms or chambers or legal workplaces. And we really wanted to understand better how the culture and practice of law impacts mental health and well-being. And what we found when I'm going to talk specifically now about junior lawyers, is we found that junior lawyers were one of the groups that are most impacted by the culture and practice of law. And for the age group 26 to 35, that was the group that responded to the survey who had the highest burnout scores. So we measured burnout on a recognized scale, and the cutoff point for that is 34.8. Our sample scored collectively 42.2, so way above the cutoff point for being at risk of burnout. And the group that scored the most on that scale were people aged 26 to 35, so at the beginning of their legal careers. We also found that junior lawyers had lower psychological safety, so that sense of feeling able to speak up about something that's worrying them, or share an idea, or speak openly in the workplace. And they also had the lowest levels of autonomy, so they had the least control over how and where they worked. So those factors and those findings point to something that we already knew, and is also backed up by studies that have been done in other jurisdictions. So the American Bar Association did a very large study in 2016 of American attorneys, and they found that the most vulnerable time in your legal career was making that transition into practice. And I think our study sort of backs that up for all the reasons I think that are probably familiar to us. Is that step up and taking on new responsibilities is a challenging time for many people in their legal career. So we now have an evidence base about what I think many of us already knew. And the challenge is how we do something about that. How can junior lawyers feel supported to speak up about what's concerning them, and find the time and the strategies to maintain their own mental health and well-being, but also what are the responsibilities of firms and organizations where they work to support them and safeguard their mental well-being. And I think increasingly that's something we really have to have a strong focus on. It's not just our individual responsibility, our employers also have a responsibility. So just as a sort of scene setting, that's some of the work that we've been doing at LawCare. And not surprisingly, I think everybody will identify we've uncovered and sort of got the evidence base now for many of the things we've been talking about for quite a long time, particularly over the last 5 or 6 years, building on the work that the national JLD have done with their surveys into mental well-being of junior lawyers too.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That's a great scene setter. And like you say, so important to have that evidence base so that we can work on those strategies for junior lawyers to help, make a more supportive environment. And we're going to be talking a little bit about that later. Clare, I was hoping to go to you next to talk about your experience as a trainee solicitor, and you're also a LawCare champion. So I was hoping you could perhaps talk about your own experiences as a junior lawyer.
Yeah, so I was a paralegal for many, many years before training. So one of those people that qualified already a little bit exhausted with the profession. And when I was training, I got involved with the JLD, subsequently became chair. And at that time is when the study that Elizabeth just mentioned that the national JLD had done at Kaylee, who's now a trustee at LawCare, had just done a study that came out. And I remember reading it and it was pretty stark. It was probably more depressing than some of the stuff that Elizabeth just said. So I had well-being as kind of top of my agenda for my year as chairwoman, and I arranged a number of events in Mental Health Awareness Week that were sold out within weeks, and it was clear that everyone really, really wanted to discuss this. And we had a great panel discussion at Eversheds, and we did a kind of a morning of focus on well-being and mental health. Which was really well attended. So I then got asked to be a LawCare champion. I remember going into work and having a letter sent to me from Elizabeth, and I was so excited when I got it. It was inviting me to go up to this day in London and be a champion. I was like, yeah, I'll do it. And in that role, I've done a lot of discussions like this. We have regular roundtable discussions where we get together and talk, in particular middle of pandemic and how things are going to change going forward, because the kind of issues are a bit different now, and generally just keeping the momentum up so that everyone's talking about this, because as Elizabeth says, we know the figures, we've got all of that out there. We really need to just keep this on the agenda and actually force change. And one of the other things that I saw in the email beforehand to talk about is, so I'm also a social mobility ambassador for the Law Society, because I don't come from the kind of traditional background that people think of lawyers, though it's less traditional now. But I think that's another element to it, is financial barriers to the profession have an impact on mental wellbeing as well. And thinking back, as I say, I was absolutely exhausted by the time I qualified because I didn't have that financial backing or already had a training contract, that I had to juggle a load of jobs to get to the point to even do the GDL. And I think there's also that kind of feeling like an imposter. Though actually once you get into the profession, you do find that you're not an imposter. But at the time when you walk in to do your GDL and you think everyone else has got a family, their family's full of lawyers, they've got a training contract, that kind of stuff just also weighs on your well-being. And I think this profession is not that great for diversity. And I think it all goes hand in hand with well-being, and how we have a lot that we really need to work on and change.
Great, thank you so much, Claire. And I think that's such a good point that you raised as well about the financial insecurity for people who put themselves through a law degree and then perhaps, if you're not a law degree, another degree, a GLD, and then the LPC. There's a lot of cost involved in getting there without the security of knowing, actually, I will make it. If you haven't got that training contact, you're like kind of throwing all your eggs into one basket without the security of a future job. So I think that's a really good point. Do you think that there is any way that the profession could be more inclusive for people who are from different financial backgrounds?
There's clearly work that has been done in the last few years, the Sqe, but I think that's a whole other topic, especially with the results coming out. But I think it's clearly something they're very aware of and they're trying to, but it's not something that's got an easy fix, and you have to go right to the root of it in terms of kind of financial diversity and just generally diversity, as you really need to be going to right to the beginning, the engagement in schools, reaching out to people that otherwise wouldn't know what law is like apart from on TV. They don't have a mentor in their life that's like that. And I think there's great schemes out there, things like LEDLET, which started in Wales, which just gets people that experience. But I think we need more buy-in from kind of Law Society and SRA to get to the point where we're reaching those people that probably would be great lawyers, but just don't know how to be because they haven't got that role model or money in their life. So it's putting the time and the money into just actually tapping in and finding those people.
Thank you, that's really, really interesting. And I think perhaps now we can move on to Hannah and Grace. Hannah, if we perhaps start with you. You very recently qualified, I think in the last few weeks, am I right in saying that?
January the 6th. Yeah.
January the 6th, congratulations. Perhaps you could tell us a bit about what your experience was like as a junior lawyer and any challenges that you faced.
Yeah, so I basically started with Alun Jones Family Law about 2 years ago. Before that, I worked in Howells for a year and a half as a legal assistant. I only finished the LPC last summer, which I did part-time with work. I think the main problem that I faced as a junior lawyer is never celebrating the idea that you're learning and don't know enough. I think people tend to associate junior lawyers with starting at the bottom, and we all kind of have this one goal where all we want to do is be qualified, or whether it's financial or whether it's just the idea of wanting to calm down and not needing to learn anymore. It's a constant race to the top to try and get done with everything because of the amount of training and the years you have to put in. And I kind of feel like the problem I had was, as Claire alluded to, there was a bit of a financial barrier for myself, and I had to work all the way through uni, albeit at the beginning, pubs and restaurants, to make the money to be able to actually socialise alongside doing my law degree anyway. And when it came to third year, even though it was a full-time degree, I needed to get a full-time job to be able to afford to do anything outside of uni. So I ended up starting with Howells, doing 32 hours a week with a full-time degree in third year, which simply wiped all of my time out. And I was seeing people and going out with people, and I didn't think I was burning out. And I got to, I think, the beginning of third year, and I'd actually lost 3 stone and looked completely sick and was not well at all. And I had to step back and realise, actually, if I'm not in work and not in uni, I'm out drinking, trying to compensate for the time I'm missing with the people that are hanging out without me. And it had to stop. So I essentially cut down my hours a little bit at Howells, which I want to emphasise was entirely my own doing and not them forcing the hours on me. And then I went into my master's and moved from Howells to Alun Jones at that point, and basically balanced the part-time master's with full or more hours a week, and basically threw myself into the same thing. So I think my lesson was that essentially I didn't learn all the way through and kept making the same mistakes because I was looking around at other people thinking, they're ahead of me, they know better, I can do better. And in reality, the answer was I couldn't have done any better. I was doing absolutely everything I could have. But people that per se were a bit more lucky and had a bit more financial backing, perhaps had contacts that they knew they could use when they finished uni, perhaps didn't have the same pressure to try and make a name for themselves as soon as they came out of uni. because I think what terrified me was the idea of finishing uni, not having any experience in the job market, and thinking, how on earth are people going to know my name? Which was why I started so early on during my degree. Whether that worked or not, I don't actually know, but I definitely don't think it was worth the relief I felt afterwards, simultaneously thinking, well, I have a job while everyone's job hunting, but I'm also exhausted and people are just ready and raring to go. So I think I had the masters and balanced that, and it was only in September that I didn't actually have any studying to do and I was just doing a job. Obviously I replaced that with the committee, but that's a lot more fun. And I think I just sat back and thought, well, what do I do now? Because I'm so used to overworking. And I will say that qualifying in January, it was amazing. And I'm so glad that I'm here, and I've only just turned 24, and it's a good age to qualify, and I'm happy that I can put it behind me now. But I can't help but think, this is great and this is everything I wanted. Was it worth me rushing and racing and balancing everything, given all the things I missed in the last 5 years? Probably not. I could have waited another year or two to qualify. It would have been fine. And I think my lesson to myself was, I wish I could have gone back and said to everyone, just celebrate not knowing what you're doing. Celebrate the lack of security you've got for your job. Celebrate you've got no money. Celebrate that you still get nervous answering the phone, because in actual fact, that was all part of making it here. And that kind of world just whizzed by, and now I'm here, which is great. But I do think there needs to be more emphasis on learning, and how you climb up makes you the solicitor you are, or the barrister you are, and it gives you a style and the way that you are with clients, the way you write letters, every little thing you do. So every time that you think, I'm a little bit far behind, I'm a little bit slow, just enjoy it and savor it, because when you get to a point where you're not panicking over letters anymore, I'm telling you, you will miss that buzz.
Thank you, Hannah. It's really great to hear from you. And I don't think that's uncommon to hear about junior lawyers. Obviously, you kind of pitted against each other from the minute you step foot into university, because supply and demand, there's not enough training contracts out there. So it's that kind of constant battle to get the most experience, to make sure that you're seen to be doing the most. And I think you kind of, as you say, it just carries through. Do you feel, since you've qualified, that has kind of eased off a bit, or do you think that lawyers will always be looking for the next thing?
I think it depends on the type of lawyer that you are and what you're after, really. I think if you are someone that wants to go into law because you're comfortable with a big audience, you want to communicate with people, you want to go further and spread your name, I think the hunger won't ever stop there. I think if you are a type of lawyer that wants to go into that law just because you love what you're doing, sometimes it is a bit more relaxing. And while I am still looking for things to do and, ways to communicate and network with people, I don't feel the pressure that I did before. I think, actually, if I want to do this in 10 years, I can. I'm doing my job right now because I love my job, and not because I want people to think, oh, wow, she's powerful, like they do on the TV. So I think there is a certain type of hunger for people, but definitely if you felt the same type that I did when I was a trainee paralegal student, it's a lot more relaxing now, just thinking, actually, this can wait until Monday.
That's great. And that's probably good to know for those who are in that junior lawyer stage at the moment. Grace, you've recently qualified as well at Geldards. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience? Was it similar to Hannah's?
Maybe not. I was just thinking that, actually, because you sort of mentioned the change from when you qualify, and I think maybe I've had the opposite thing, really, where I'm feeling more pressure now than I did before. So yeah, I qualified in August after training for 2 years with the firm, and previously I'd paralegals and I'd worked in-house, so I'd had quite a bit of experience before I managed to get my training contract. And I was furloughed for part of my training contract, which I'm sure many junior lawyers can share that experience. And so my kind of focus on wellbeing happened when I came back, and I felt like I'd kind of taken a step back, where I'd built confidence in that first seat and thought, oh, I kind of know what I'm doing. I'm sort of useful now. And then you had months off, and I came back and I thought, oh, do I know what I'm doing? Am I back at square one? And when I came back to the firm at that time, there was this renewed interest in wellbeing, and we formed a committee, and it was a big focus of the firm. So that's when I started looking at it. And of particular interest to me, or something that weighs on my mind, is kind of my anxiety. So I tend to overthink. I'm sure a lot of lawyers are perfectionists. It's a profession that attracts perfectionists, isn't it? And I think any little mistake weighs on our mind. So for me, as Hannah was saying, she kind of is a bit more relaxed now you're qualified, or you're not always chasing that that reward. For me, now being qualified, I suddenly felt this pressure to know everything, and I thought I was comparing myself to everyone in my team and thinking I'm never going to get there. When you're a trainee, you've got that fail safe of someone checking your work all the time, and you think, oh well, I'm just a trainee. But yeah, so that happened to me in the summer, and I'm sort of getting through it now. But that first 6 months after you qualify, I found that quite hard to cope with the new pressure, and to feel like I would eventually know what I was doing. But we are still learning. I have to tell myself that just because you're now a solicitor rather than a trainee, everyone is always learning, and you'll never know everything. You just got to remind yourself of that all the time.
Yeah, absolutely true. And I mean, what kind of changes did you find in the place where you were working then, after you came back after the pandemic, which obviously shed a huge spotlight on the well-being of pretty much every profession, but especially in the legal profession? Did you find that the kind of things that your organisation put in place were particularly helpful, or what did you find that actually did help you in terms of your anxiety?
Yeah, I think as we were on that committee, and our approach was to sort of try lots of different things because everyone's different, and I think different tactics help different people. So we created groups just where people could talk about things other than work. So where there's a common interest, hobbies like gardening, that kind of thing. We tried to encourage people to go out for walks. So we did a steps competition, which some people like. They got involved in that. Generally, just trying to arrange chats with people talking about different issues that might affect them, so stress or grieving, that kind of thing. And we have a wellbeing hour. It's actually today. We finished early on the last Wednesday of the month, which is nice. So we tried, I think, to approach to give options to everyone to what might suit, because personally, there's a lot of resources on mindfulness, but I'm not the kind of person that sits still well. So I prefer to go for a walk, and that's my way of being mindful. So I was certainly glad that when we came back, there was this renewed focus on well-being, and that's why I got involved and wanted to continue it with the JLD. And I think as junior lawyers, we can all keep a focus on it, and as we move up through our career, we can make sure that the people coming after us are looked after as well.
Absolutely, and I think I think you're so right, and I think it's great to hear that there were some things that put in place after the pandemic that really did help you as a junior lawyer. Were there any things, Hannah, that you would recommend to anyone that was kind of perhaps maybe suffering with ill mental health at the moment, who's a junior lawyer, finding things stressful or anxious? Is there anything that you did during your time as a junior lawyer that you would recommend to others?
I think it's about speaking to people and locating the right people that you can talk to. I think I had a mixture of friends that did law that were really supportive, and a mixture of friends that kind of weren't supportive because there was still that kind of oddly competitive vibe that I think you can still get even if you're friends in the law profession, which I don't really understand. But I think the one thing that I think made my experience a lot easier was just being able to just talk about it. I think the difference I had with joining Howells was I always said, I'll do this, it's fine, I'll be fine. And I wasn't always fine. The states I used to come in to work sometimes, I would not have had any sleep and I would still be powering on. Whereas I'm in a boat now where if I need a break, I need a break. And I think it's all about the way you say it. I've learned now not to kind of go in and talk to someone and be like, oh, I'm really sorry, but maybe I will go in and say, I need time, I know myself, and this is what I need. And I would trust that who I was speaking to would have enough respect for me to be aware that I would only be doing this if I really needed to take that time. So I think just being open and honest, and I think it's a little bit like a chain reaction. If you're the first one in your office to say, I'm struggling, actually, I need something, and tell people what you need, other people engage in the conversation. Sometimes it's just breaking the ice in a really difficult room where we're all getting on with work. And I feel like since I've become a bit more impersonal in work and a bit more open and honest, the friendships that I've made in work, I dare say, are genuine friendships. And we will now go out outside work if we've had a day. I think a lot of people can relate in a law firm on a Friday saying it's 4 o'clock, hours time, do you want a beer? And sometimes that's all you need. So I think it all starts with yourself. Don't judge yourself like you think people would judge you, because in reality you've just got to approach it like you would want someone to approach it if you spoke to them. And there's always other people, and the worst thing that can happen is it doesn't go down well, and you know that you deserve better elsewhere, so just give it a go.
I think that's such great advice, and I imagine that a lot of junior lawyers often fear speaking out because you're so used to just taking everything on. You want to be seen to be able to handle it all, or not, not be seen struggling in any way. And I think that a lot of people can maybe hold back, whereas actually we're all human, and in the most part it'll be received really well. It's just kind of getting it out and just saying and putting your hand up and saying that I am struggling a bit here. Can you help me? Elizabeth and Clare, I don't know whether you have anything to add to that, kind of any advice to junior lawyers about what they can do perhaps for themselves in order to help themselves through that particularly difficult time.
I was going to say, listening to Hannah there is exactly how I was, and I still catch myself being the yes, I'll do it all, and then what people can't see is you in the evening being like, I can't do it all, why did I say I do it all? And I think one of the big things for me that kind of changed that was actually when we moved to all being remote, and then when it was all initial panic, what's going on in the world, is I remember one of the partners on a team call being quite open about how hard he was finding, especially juggling kids and work and whatever, and saying, we're all in this together, it's a really horrible situation. And hearing someone up high talking about them struggling made me think I'm going to be far more open. And I think the biggest thing for firms is having that culture where we feel, if you've got the people who are more senior speaking out about issues they're having with their well-being and mental health, and it filters down, and it makes you feel, because as you say, as a trainee, you don't want to be the person to say I'm struggling, but if your seniors are saying it, then that's when you feel that you can. And it shouldn't be that way, but I felt that was for me a switch of being like, oh, okay, it is okay for me to be like, no, I can't do that, sorry, I'm struggling, I just need a day off, or I'm just not feeling great. And I think that's what we need to shift in the profession, is it's okay to not be resilient 100% of the time, because I think resilience is kind of championed to the point of it being very detrimental on all of us.
And I mean, I think Hannah and Claire have articulated that really well, is that having the confidence, which is sometimes easier said than done, to speak up about what your needs are. But it's also, I think, what's aligned with that is having the recognition that looking after yourself is got to be a priority, that sort of fit your oxygen mask first approach. That if you're going to be able to manage the demands that are on you and the stresses and strains of being a junior lawyer, that prioritizing those things that support your mental health and well-being are really important. So if it's mindfulness or getting out for a walk, that you make sure you don't sacrifice those things, because what tends to happen is when we're busy or we're feeling under pressure, we chuck everything out of our lives that actually supports our mental well-being. We sacrifice going to the pub with our friends or going to choir practice or whatever it is, so that we can just get through a few more of those emails. But actually, you'd be much better off making sure you do those things, because those social connections, exercise, having a break, taking your mind somewhere else, these are all the things that go into your toolbox to help you manage when you are having a difficult day. You've got more in that reservoir to keep going. So I think, as hard as it can be, is recognizing that you got to be kind to yourself and prioritize your own needs and put those first, and have some things that are non-negotiable. And then having, as you've described really well, Hannah, is being able to say to someone, not apologetically, is saying, this is what I need, or this is what my problem is, and this is what I need from you. And I think that approach can be really helpful. And what you usually find is actually people are really receptive. We build up in our minds this sense that if I talk about it, I'm just going to be shut down or no one's going to care. But actually, when you do speak up, I think most people find they get a good response from somebody. So, yeah.
No, I think that's some really helpful advice to junior lawyers. And also, perhaps, Elizabeth, you could tell us a little bit about what employers, managers, people who are more senior in the profession, what can they be doing to help kind of those just starting out in their careers?
They could be doing a lot. So from our life in the law research, we asked respondents, people who participated in the survey, what do you find the most valuable mental well-being support in the workplace? And the top answer was regular catch-ups. So that opportunity to sit down and talk to somebody about your work, because those sorts of moments build up trust and a relationship with somebody else, so that, like what Hannah described, if you're regularly regularly having a catch up with your boss, then if something has gone wrong or you're worried, you're going to feel more comfortable talking to them about it because you've got that relationship and you feel comfortable and you trust them to speak up about what's going on for you. So I think it's really important when you have, and what we aligned with that, we found is that something like less than half the people that had a management responsibility had any training. So I think if you are responsible for junior lawyers, you're supervising them within your team, then you've got to carve out and prioritize the time to support them. Make sure those regular catch-ups happen, that you don't push them to one side because of competing obligations. I think particularly during the pandemic, I've participated in quite a few junior lawyer events, and I'm sure you've all had similar experiences where the sort of out of sight, out of mind has happened. So where you're not physically in the office, juniors and trainees can be accidentally excluded from meetings or sort of not quite forgotten about, but aren't seen to be the pressing priority that they ought to be. And that can be very hard. It can put the pressure on you to sort of have to put your hand up and say, I'm over here and I need some help. So I think if you're in a management role, it's really important that you stick to the arrangements you've made for supervision and catch-ups, that they're there, that you get yourself some training if you haven't had any, and that you recognize that you are nurturing and developing, the future associates and potential future partners of your organization. So you want to give them the best start on their career path, and by investing in them, that will reap dividends. So I think about recognizing and having some emotional intelligence into the perspectives of junior lawyers and what they may be experiencing. And so maybe take a step back when you might be presented with something you weren't expected, to try and put yourself in their shoes and see what they may be feeling to help you feel better able to respond to them. But I think the number one is making the time for those regular catch-ups and not cancelling them.
Thank you, Elizabeth. That's some really, really helpful advice for some organisations about how they can support people in their organisation. Claire, do you find that because obviously you're associate now, as you've gone through, is there anything that you've tried to implement to kind of like keep an eye out or to kind of check in with anyone that's more junior in the profession, or is there anything that you do or can offer as like an advice in your organisation?
I say it's exactly what Elizabeth just said, and I was talking to some of our trainees about this yesterday as I went back into the office, and it's that checking in. And I think one of the things we've implemented recently is, as well as having a kind of not formal, but a line manager or a supervisor for each trainee, there's also a buddy or a mentor that's someone a little bit stepped down, who's recently qualified or a year or so qualified. So it's that person that you've got the more informal, where you actually build a friendship with them and you can go to them with those kind of things. And then you've got your more formal supervision. And I think that works really well, because even when I qualified, because I trained elsewhere and came to Capital, it's that initial finding your feet of, it's all terrifying, especially when you're remote. And I think just having two people to check in with, one that's informal and one that's more informal, is a great way for someone to just, like the questions that you might think are stupid when you start and you're like, how do I do this and how do I do that? Having someone who's just gone through it is a great step to have. And I think, as we're still in a pandemic, but as firms decide whether to kind of continue on a fully remote, continue on a hybrid, whatever, it's what we do in terms of actually juniors' well-being, but also professional development, is something that really needs to be thought about. Because most of what I learned was watching other people work, just listening to someone on the phone to a client, the personal skills of building client relationships. And I think there is quite a lot of anxiety from people training now that they're just not going to get that. And I think it's thinking about the effect that's going to have professionally and well-being, because I think I'd be feeling a bit like, oh, am I falling behind because I'm not seeing these things happen, I'm not involved in stuff, hi, I'm here. So I think it's a lot of, we're going to have to put real effort into making sure that the same level of training and support is there. It's not just about adding someone on a Teams call and in an email. We really need to be thinking about making sure people feel involved and are learning, so they don't start to stress about the things that we didn't have to. We were just sat listening to someone on the phone. So I think that's the kind of main stuff, and that's stuff that we're trying to think about and get in place. But obviously it's difficult because 1 month we're back in full time and then the next we're not allowed in, and it's hard to see what the future looks like when it's all changing. But we do need to make that effort to check in on people. As you say, out of sight, out of mind. We don't know what someone is really feeling like if they don't have the support network to speak to. And I think that's where buddies and mentors are really, really key.
Yeah, and absolutely vital, like you say. I mean, during the pandemic, when people actually weren't in the office, they didn't have those learning opportunities that you perhaps would have had if you had that training contract. Sat next to somebody asking those little questions. It's like the little things that you would just turn around and say when you have to actually type them to somebody feel quite different. You're like, oh, actually, I'm overthinking this. This is a stupid question. Whereas usually just blurt it out and you come straight back. So I think that's a really good point. And moving forward, if we are going to be in this kind of hybrid world with a bit of a mix, how do we manage people properly? Grace, you mentioned that you did part of your, and probably Johanna as well, did part of your training contract in the pandemic. How did you find it? I mean, what kind of tips would you give to people that perhaps are part-time remote working? How do you keep those communication lines open? How do you keep learning those kind of like soft skills that you would get if you were sat next to somebody in work?
It's difficult, isn't it? I think I was lucky that the teams I was involved with were quite good with Teams, and we'd have a catch up every day, and we'd kind of be on and off those conversations all the time. So you are in constant contact. But I think what we've already spoken about, there's two sides of the same coin there, where some people might not be getting any experience or any work because you're not sat there. So, the partners aren't going, oh, you're the trainee, you do this. But equally, people won't know if you're overworked because they don't know who's come up to you and given you the work.
Yeah.
So I personally found those catch-ups on Teams really, really helpful. And I have been able to join in on meetings. It seems like a lot of clients are doing meetings that way anyway. And even when we move back to the office, I do think that's the approach a lot of clients seem to be taking. Why pay for travel and all of that when you can just hop on Teams? So I suppose you have got to get used to that way of working. And I was lucky that my team did include me, so I felt like I got that experience. I don't know about you, Hannah. Was that what happened with you as well?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a mixed bag for me. I mean, I'm not going to lie, I absolutely loved working from home the first summer of the pandemic because I had a garden with Wi-Fi and it was boiling. But in terms of work, I think it was a very mixed bag. I think I made the most of working from home because at that time, when we just started working from home, I was still a paralegal, and then I started my training contract, I think the June of 2020. So I had a bit of a mixed bag here in the way that I made the most of being on my own, because independent work that took a lot of time, where I was prone to getting distracted or seeing people looking over at me and wanting to always look busy, even if sometimes I had to look away or sometimes just Google something, even for a bit of reassurance. I was definitely able to do that more working from home. I felt like, talking about working hours, I was happy to work a little bit later if I absolutely had to, because working from home afforded me the freedom to have an hour in the garden, read my book. Sometimes I had housemates in the garden making a barbecue and I go out and join them for half an hour in the day. So if I need to work until 6, then it doesn't actually really matter. But then the other side of it is that at the time of the training contract, there was a point where it was myself as a paralegal, an office admin and a director, and that was our team. So in terms of having a close solicitor by me, I didn't have one to really call upon. So I think my learning in terms of the things I kind of half knew benefited a lot from me being alone and independent. But the things that I had no idea where to begin, I think I learned them far slower because I actually needed Zooms and a bit of a prompt beforehand. But I think Zoom did get better gradually. I think we all had to eventually give up and say, fine, this is the way everything's going. So I do like the flexi, and in my job, I have the benefit of largely being in control of my own diary. And I'll even admit now that if I have a day in the office and there are movable appointments, I will back to back myself in there because I know I can sit down and focus and have a hard working day. Whereas if I'm really exhausted on a work from home day, I will ensure that I have at least 2 hours of my day that are just emails or calmer bits of work, simply because I can afford myself that step back time. So looking at the moment with the flexi arrangement and telling from my diary already which days to be ready for and which days I don't have to worry about, I think is an absolute blessing that I didn't have before lockdown.
Yeah, that's a really great point as well, and nice to hear like the flip side of it about giving you some sort of independence with your work and kind of a bit of confidence because you're working by yourself as well. It's quite nice to hear, because usually you only see the negatives of having to work from home, so that's great to hear. I think we should probably move on to the Q&A now. So if you've got any questions, please do just pop them in the chat and we can put them to the panel. But I have one myself, which is about the new Sqe qualification. And I don't know how much, obviously you guys would have gone through the LPC and training contract routes. But so Elizabeth, I don't know, maybe you might be the best person to ask about this. I don't know how much you know about it. But obviously it's slightly different in terms of that it allows it a bit more, well, it's supposed to allow a bit more flexibility and affordability, because the qualifying work experience can be working as a paralegal, working in a law clinic, rather than having to do the traditional training contract route. Do you think there are any potential benefits in terms of those coming into the profession and their mental health for having this kind of flexibility rather than the traditional route?
I think that's a really interesting question. I know that, I mean, the first results were out last week, weren't they, for the Sqe? And I think the pass rate was 53%, which is slightly below the average for the old LPC, isn't it? And I did the really traditional old Law Society finals. I was the last cohort that did that exam. I don't know enough about the detail of the Sqe, but I understand the premise of why it's been brought in. And I think that anything that's about widening access and giving people greater flexibility is a good thing, because I think a theme that's already been coming through from our discussions is, one size does not fit all. And I think we need a range of routes into qualification that people, Hannah, when you were describing working and studying at the same time, that's hugely stressful. Some people can manage that. Some people can't. I think the opportunity, if you've done some paralegal work, that then can count towards your qualifying work experience, because many people, like Claire, you said you were a paralegal for a long time before you started training, that counts for something. I think there are other challenges, though, with the exam itself, in that it's a multiple choice exam. And I think the jury is still out on how people who may need special measures when they sit the exam through, they may be neurodiverse or they have disabilities, is how you're actually going to manage that exam, which can be very intense. And I think there's been concerns raised about that. But I think on a general principle, I think a more flexible approach where people can combine study and work in a way that works for them, it must be, is just another opportunity that's widening access and giving people choice for what works for them.
Yeah, but I mean, it does sound positive from that aspect. Would you agree, Claire? Because obviously social mobility ambassador, you do a lot of work around this.
Yeah, as I say, actually, we have an Sqe trainee in the team at Capital who has just had his results and was one of the people that passed, luckily. But I think the kind of key there is he's already feeling part of the team and is a key person of the team. And by the time he qualifies, you'll have that practical experience that we all come in a bit terrified because we don't have it if we've just come from LPC or GDL. So I think from a wellbeing perspective, generally on that, it is a good way to get into the profession and know what's going on practically, because we all know the LPC was not like real life. Because I was paralegaling at the same time, I would look at the LPC and be like, it doesn't work like that in practice. So this is the way of people actually entering the profession, knowing what they're doing and being bedded into a team. And it feels like they're already a key team member, and that's got to be good for your confidence, because as well as studying, you're doing it. I think in terms of social mobility, I think that I haven't had time to look at some of the kind of breakdowns of who passed and who failed and demographics, but I think there has been some initial concern around it not really dealing with diversity, because when you start to break it down into different groups, you've got much more failing in different backgrounds. So I do worry about that, and especially because if you fail, you're going to have to pay to redo it yourself. And so whether it's going to be the answer in terms of social mobility, I don't know, but I think it's definitely a step in the right direction generally in overhauling how we come in, because as I say, you do uni and you just kind of then park that when you come into training. Obviously we need that background, but it's a much better way, I think, to get people feeling more comfortable actually practically practicing than just throwing them in on a day one training contract.
Great. Well, if there are no questions, we haven't got any in the group chat, so we've obviously covered absolutely everything. I'd like to give the last word to Elizabeth, just to chat about the support and resources that you offer at LawCare. Obviously, if people are coming into this profession, it's so good that they know about your charity and how it can support them throughout. So if you could just tell us a little bit about what you can offer.
Yeah, sure. So the best starting point to really find out about what we offer and our resources is on our website. So as I mentioned right at the beginning, we run a support service, which is a telephone helpline, confidential email and web chat. Our web chat operates on a Wednesday, which is today, but we are hoping by the end of the year that we'll be able to offer web chat every day. So that's an opportunity to talk to somebody or share with someone how you're feeling, and get some support of how you might resolve things and move forward. On our website, we have lots of resources, top tips for your mental health and well-being. We've got blogs and articles, all on topics. All our material is geared for people in the legal profession. So it's all aimed at people working and studying in the law with that perspective in terms of what we write about. So do have a look at those resources. We also have a podcast called The Legal Mind. The second series of that is out at the moment. You can download that from wherever you get your podcasts. It's on Spotify and various other channels. We also have an online educational training resource called Fit for Law. And the first phase of that is already out. It's free. We did it in conjunction with the Open University, and it's all aimed at helping legal professionals understand their emotions and their reactions to things that are happening around them in the workplace, to better help them manage their mental health and well-being. You don't have to do the entire program. You can just dive into it and do a little bit of it. It's evidence-based, and we ran a number of focus groups with legal professionals across the UK to help shape that content. So that's another resource of ours. So please do have a look at our website. You can follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn. And if you want to get involved in LawCare, from time to time, we're looking for volunteers. All of that information is on our website, and you can sign up to our newsletter, which comes out monthly, which just gives you an update on what we're doing. We try to list events like this that are taking place around the legal profession as well on mental health and well-being on our website. So we are hopefully you're a go-to organization if you're looking for support and resources and information about mental well-being in the law. And the Life in the Law study that I mentioned right at the beginning, you can download that report from our website. There's also a short animation about it and an infographic that gives you all the key findings of the research, and most importantly, the recommendations of where we think that research needs to take us in terms of practical steps forward to start improving the culture in law to make it a better place for all of us to be working in.
That's a very positive note to end on. Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And thank you to all of our panelists. I think this has been a really, really helpful session. And like we say, we'll share the recording so that we can spread it even further. So thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.